Swaikab, and welcome back to this photo journal where I didn't really go out to shoot any b-roll per se, but wanted to just talk about some of the things that I've done in photography in the last couple of weeks. And in this case, it is me being able to shoot 120 film for the first time. And in this set, this is a contact sheet from a recent vlog, and I have the second roll to show you for the first time in this video. And before we get into this 120 film, there's a couple of experiments that I got to try out, which is to try to connect two film photos together to make a panorama image. And with that exploration, I went back to a old photo that I will show you right now here, and I was trying out a different photo project that I hope to share with you in the future. And in this case, this was the new roll that I shot in black and white of this scene, and it just so happened that I forgot to take into account that the first few images will have this cut because this section, I believe the explanation is that it's already exposed, so that's why it's completely white, so I needed to take an extra photo, but I forgot to account for that, so this is all that I got in this scene. And this is a new roll because in the previous shot I tried to take a photo of this scene, but it so happened that a bus came in the way and blocked it. Yes, in this case I was using color, and then my next roll was in black and white. But I thought, like, since this was a similar scene, can I combine the two? In which case I tried to blend the two images together here, and then the important part for me is the line in between these two buildings together, and try to make them aligned as best as I can. And then in the next image, just sort of use Photoshop and just let the bus in color bleed through to the black and white side, and just let a little bit of the 7-Eleven come show a little bit more in color at the back. And it's almost like this sort of color bus is sort of driving outside of this sort of black and white image. And after this image itself, doing it analog wise, because to do it digitally, super easy. You take one photo, then you just sort of crop out a certain part and then make it black and white. To do it digitally is very easy, but then to do it analog wise, I find it to be very interesting and something I might want to sort of experiment in the future. But this is all for the 135 film. So now back to reviewing the 120 film that I got to shoot. And this one is just a contact sheet from the film lab that I use, which was Air Lab. And these black images just were a mixture of, I suppose, forgetting to pull out the cover since it was a Holga rangefinder camera, and I'm still quite new to the rangefinder style photography. And it's these two images where I was just sort of testing out the contrast between the buildings and the clouds at the time, but because this was from the same two scenes, I could try to sort of connect the two, even though these were not on purpose. This last photo here was just trying double exposure with Holga, since you have to manually forward the film, so if you just sort of keep clicking on the camera itself, it will just keep taking exposures basically. But after this shot and talking with another friend of mine, it was obvious to me that 400 film with Holga was still too fast of a film for daytime, which, as someone who's still used to the digital format where you go out and you just shoot at f2 and you can let the shutter speed go up to 1,000 of a second, 2,000 or more, understanding that you are maybe more limited with the shutter speeds on a film camera is something I still have to get used to. But I still quite like this photo in particular, and this other one with the reflection of like the building on the other side, on one side of the glass window, and then the other side shows a little bit of the clouds. But if I had like 100 film, I'm pretty sure I could sort of get a little bit more of the clouds in the background. So the Holga, just for clarification, was at f8. So yeah, f8, ISO 400, and Holga's fastest shutter speed at 125th a second was still too slow, and so the exposure is overblown basically. But back to these two images that I found after trying out this panorama. I tried to stitch them together here, and of course it's like not a clear stitching since it was not on purpose. There's plenty of flaws like down here on the window, but something interesting that I found out when trying to edit these two together, and at first I was having a difficult time, and it's still not perfect, but basically I figure out that this exposure on the left turns out to look warmer than the photo on the right side. And it turns out that even though these were black and white photos, they still have a tint of temperature to them. One is warmer, one is cooler. And so I had to go back into Photoshop again and then turn the saturation down to 0 once more, and then I get sort of this true grayscale, if that's a term that people use, for it to blend a little bit more. But this was just a happy accident that I did not intend to use or do per se. So now here we come to the next roll of film that I would like to share, and like from a previous video that I did, just wanting to show it in this kind of format, that because it's negative, it's gonna have like quite dark here, and then in the actual photo it'll be quite bright. In this photo in particular, I really like the outcome of like the tonality and contrast, and I got to borrow again this Holga from a local developer, though that developer does not develop 120 films, so I had to use AirLab at the time. But these were the two exposures that I tried to sort of connect them to make a panorama camera, though it was kind of like in the wrong direction, so I had to like reconnect them again in the other way around. But back to the story of like the guy that I got to borrow this camera from. He was like fairly impressed of like how sharp it is, and same with me, where I keep seeing like videos from like the art of photography talking about how soft this camera is, but then I'm like a little bit surprised how sharp this center is, and of course the edges will be soft, and it was just a little bit more than I expected. But here's quite dark images, and an accident that happened here was that I set the camera to bulb mode, so even though I was expecting to shoot at 125th a second, it definitely went overboard and just went way too bright and borderline blurry. Though I feel like there's some possible artistic merit to them, but if it's not intentional, maybe it's like not good to begin with. I think it just depends on taste and who's really looking at it in the first place. Though there's like some photos where I think it gives like some kind of mystery to it, like someone like walking out of the room here, and like we kind of get a hint of like who's there, like there's someone there, but we can't really pinpoint like who it is. In this last roll or few photos that I have here, I really like this one and how it turns out as well. There's the contrast of the wall in the background, and then the person sitting down is just very bright and just sort of pops out very clearly, at least to me. And the person's obviously like on the phone, which some people don't really like to see. Like they don't like to see people on phones, that's overdone and too boring. But in this next photo over here, that looks again too dark, and I don't know why. Maybe it's just this sort of trying to use a drawing tablet as a light table is like not bright enough. But looking at the actual photo, I tried to do another double exposure here where one of my favorite spots of this building and there's like trees trying to like what looks to be growing under it, and then I find this other spot where there's constructions going on and another building that's still trying to be built, and then just flip the camera around and then take another exposure. In this case, maybe I did not do it long enough for the building that is under construction to be seen properly, but depending on how we rotate it, I think it can provide a different narrative of one structure being complete and the other one is sort of under construction. But doing double exposure is certainly something interesting, but doing on film is certainly difficult, which I might try to do more like in-camera double exposures on my Fujifilm in the future. Something along the lines of the one feature nobody uses, which I think is a factual statement that I never really seen anyone use the double exposure from Fujifilm at all. And that would be it for this sort of photo journal, shooting with 120 film, trying out panorama film, stitching photography, and blending photos together. And hopefully I get to try out these other techniques in a complete roll of film or other ideas in the future. With that said, let me know what you think, and I will see you all next time.